father-in-law, I want you to leave this house. My father-in-law suddenly told me while I was taking care of him as he was bedridden. We didn't have a bad relationship, and I didn't remember doing anything that might have offended him. So, I thought he was joking and didn't take it seriously until he handed me a certain photo. At that moment, I realized, thank you for everything you've done for me. Saying that a few days after leaving my in-laws' house. My name is Selena, a 29-year-old housewife. My husband, Aryo, is a 32-year-old salaryman. I used to work as an office clerk at the same company as my husband, but now I'm a full-time housewife. My husband has been promoted to a supervisor position. Because my husband has ambitions for career advancement and wanted my support, I decided to resign from my job. While being caught up in daily household chores, I always do my best to support my husband. However, I have been hoping for a child for a while now, but my husband, citing busyness and exhaustion, is not cooperating easily. At here indeed, he leaves early in the morning and returns home late at night. Even when he comes home, he immediately takes a bath, eats a little and falls asleep. I couldn't find the opportunity to invite him, and I became sad, wondering if the feelings we had during our honeymoon in our second year of marriage have disappeared. But I realized that things couldn't go on like this, so I mustered the courage to have a frank discussion with my husband. If he didn't intend to have children, then that was that. It was painful to be rejected without understanding anything. I want a child, but I got ahead of myself without listening to your opinion. I said apologetically, and my husband also lowered his head.
I'm sorry. Actually, there's something I've been hiding from you. Selena.
My husband said with a serious expression and revealed that his father had been bedridden since last month, which he had kept hidden from me. Edson revealed that his father had been bedridden since last month, which he had kept hidden from me. I was puzzled, as his father should be 68 years old now and didn't seem to have any illness that would cause him to become bedridden. However, my father-in-law apparently fell from a ladder while trying to fix the roof of their house and suffered a spinal cord injury. As a result, he became paralyzed from the waist down and is now bedridden. My mother is still 60, so she can't work, and if she quits her job now, we'll run out of money. I am also providing some support to my parents, but there are limits. Even though my father-in-law is currently receiving caregiving services, it requires a considerable amount of money, including medical expenses. Even if insurance covers some of the costs, it's not practical to outsource all caregiving responsibilities. So we've been discussing what to do from here on out with my mother. Even the idea of living together has come up. My husband's late return was due to them discussing this matter for a long time. Even though I haven't experienced caregiving while working, I understand that it's a very challenging task. Moreover, if my 60-year-old mother-in-law takes on the caregiving responsibility, it could be overwhelming to the point of exhaustion. My husband is the only child. I had expected that it would come to this eventually, and it may be that we will have to take care of both of my in-laws at the same time. Besides, my husband has expressed his desire to have children. If it weren't for my father-in-law's condition, he might have cooperated with me in trying to conceive. Right now, the timing is just bad. So until the situation settles down, my husband probably won't be able to change his feelings. I agreed to live together with my in-laws, saying you should have told me a little earlier. I was prepared for it, so it's okay. My husband was surprised and said, living together will cause trouble, right?
Oh, I've been talking to my mother about how we could manage it somehow. I should have relied on you earlier.
He seemed relieved by saying that it must have been a considerable emotional burden for my husband to suddenly learn that his father had become bedridden. Moreover, he must have considered potential troubles that could arise from living together. Although I understand his intention of not wanting to worry me, I wish he had relied on me a bit more as his wife. And my relationship with my mother-in-law is neither good nor bad. She is indifferent to me, so she is essentially harmless. I don't see her as the type of person to bully her daughter-in-law like on TV dramas. Besides, even though we are family, we are essentially strangers to each other. With the understanding that some conflicts are inevitable and that I was ready to accept them. I started living with my in-laws, and I was working hard. Taking care of my immobile father-in-law turned out to be more difficult than I had imagined. There were many things to do, like wiping his body and making sure he didn't choke on his food by softening it. The fortunate thing amidst the unfortunate situation is that my father-in-law was kind to me and always cared about me. Father-in-law was apologetic every day, and he often gave me good sweets and gifts brought by his friends who came to visit him to show his appreciation. However, my stress continued to accumulate. For some reason, my husband's personality completely changed as soon as we started living together. Up until then, he had been trying his best to fulfill his role as the head of the household. No matter how busy he was with work, he would always talk to me and give me words of encouragement. Moreover, since we started living with my in-laws, my husband has become like a big child. He assumes that I should be responsible for all household chores, and if I cannot do something, he would say, "Why can't you do such a simple task?" My mother could do it properly. Although my mother-in-law is indifferent to me, she dotes on my husband. As a result, as my husband's behavior became more assertive, my mother-in-law began to say things like, "You're a terrible wife if you damage Mario's mood. You need to work harder and take care of Mario's mood. That's the wife's duty." As a result, I began to feel increasingly burdened by the pressure to meet these demands, even though no one else helped with the household chores or my father-in-law's care. The prevailing attitude was that it was my job to do everything. It was exhausting to handle all the household chores alone, and with the added responsibility of caring for my father-in-law, it was inevitable that some things would fall by the wayside. No matter how much I talked to my husband about it, he just said, "You're just being lazy. Stop relying on others," and he wouldn't listen to me at all. Furthermore, the misfortune continued as my father-in-law's forgetfulness worsened after 6 months of living together. However, that was an unavoidable situation. After all, in the past 6 months, the only people who have had conversations with my father-in-law are me and his friend who visits every few days. My mother-in-law and husband gradually began treating my father-in-law as if he didn't exist, and when I went out shopping and left the house, they left him unattended. Given the lack of stimulation and inability to walk, it's understandable that his memory loss has become more frequent. But when is Selena going to go home? He asks me now, perhaps having forgotten that I am even living with them. For my father-in-law, I'm now like a guest. CTC to successful, and I will go back when your father-in-law gets better, I say as I take care of him, trying to brush off the topic lightly. At first, I used to say things like,
Sai, what are you talking about? Father-in-law, this is your home, and we live together.
but when I said that, he was surprised and confused, saying things like,
We never agreed to live together. Who told you that?
and it only caused more confusion. That's why lately I just let it slide or give vague responses. In fact, when talking to someone with dementia, it is advised not to deny what they are saying, and it's better to go along with it. As a result, I tried to go along with my father-in-law's conversation, but my husband and my mother-in-law are unable to do so, and they keep denying my father-in-law's words. Because of that, my father-in-law stopped talking to them, and gradually I became one of the few people who talked to him, along with his friends. My husband comes home and shouts, "You haven't even cleaned the house." It's a filthy mess. If my mother gets sick, you better pay for her medical bills. You're a curse. It's useless to argue with my husband, and it only makes the conversation longer, so I stay quiet. Then, without fail, my mother-in-law says, I can't believe I have such a useless daughter-in-law. It's okay, Rio. Don't worry about me. It's pointless to say anything to a daughter-in-law who bullies her mother-in-law. They blame and criticize me like this. My husband doesn't come home until late at night these days, and he can't even help with the housework, so I wonder what he's talking about. But I'm too physically and mentally exhausted to argue back and defend myself. I want to run away, but I can't leave my father-in-law behind. If I leave home, I'm sure no one will take care of him. I've grown tired of my husband and mother-in-law, but I have great respect for my father-in-law and cannot abandon him. I've made up my mind to divorce my husband once my father-in-law passes away, and I live my life with this determination every day. I never want to be misunderstood, but I've never once thought that I want my father-in-law to go to heaven quickly. However, as long as the situation of me caring for my father-in-law remains unchanged, it is difficult for me to leave my in-laws' house. One day when my mother-in-law went out for lunch with a friend, and it was just me and my father-in-law at home, something happened. As usual, I was taking care of my father-in-law, but that day he asked me with a serious expression,
When are you going to go home?
I thought to myself, here we go again. but I was so physically and mentally exhausted that I had given up on trying to reason with him. So, I responded, as long as I am Mario's wife, I'll be here. But if we get divorced, I might leave. Then with a serious expression, my father-in-law said, if that's the case, then get off this house. Until now, whenever I had made small talk, he would start another conversation right away. But it was the first time he was so engaged, and because the atmosphere was different than usual, I was surprised and said, don't joke like that. Let's have our meal. Today I made a simmered dish that your father likes, and it's nice and soft. I felt like it wouldn't be a good idea to continue the conversation like this, so I tried to get up.
However, my father-in-law said, look at this, and handed me a photo.
And so, with such seriousness, and without his usual gentle demeanor, I was confused as he handed me the photo for me to check. The photo showed my husband walking arm in arm with a woman I didn't know, and what's more, they were seen entering a hotel together. This was clearly a photo of an affair in progress. I was confused. Actually, I never thought that my husband was having an affair, and on top of that, my father-in-law suddenly gave me the evidence. I understand that it can be difficult to comprehend this situation, that despite my confusion, my father-in-law continued with the conversation.
I cannot imagine that you and Mario have a marital relationship. Please live your own life. It is shameful for me as a father to see my son doing such a thing. At least let him make amends for it.
And as he said that, my father-in-law revealed that he had been pretending to be senile all this time, and had been working behind the scenes to get me and my husband divorced.
I want to thank you for taking care of me again this time. That's why I want nothing but your happiness, said my father-in-law, his warm words conveying his strong feelings.
Despite being dissatisfied with the current situation, I didn't take any action to change it. Even though I couldn't say I lacked the will to change, I had not even felt the desire to change. And yet, my father-in-law had pretended to be senile, deceived the family, and collected evidence for my sake. While shedding tears of gratitude for my father-in-law's kindness, I quickly packed my belongings and said, thank you for everything to him. However, if I leave, there will be no one left to take care of my father-in-law. At people, I was worried about that, but my father-in-law had already made arrangements for someone to take care of him. But to my surprise, my father-in-law had some savings that he had kept hidden from my mother-in-law, and he was planning to use it to hire a helper for a while. Moreover, it seems that he is planning to enter a care facility next month, so there will be no need for me to take care of him anymore. It seems that this time, the friend who often visited my father-in-law and me also turned out to be a lawyer who collected evidence in place of my father-in-law, who was unable to move regarding my husband's affair. As I was afraid that my movements would be exposed if I went straight to my parents' house. I explained the situation to them and took refuge in a business hotel for the time being. But then, in the middle of the night, when my husband would have returned home, I received a frantic phone call. The house was left as it was with laundry and dishes left out, and since my mother-in-law said she would be late coming home, they probably didn't do anything thinking I would come back. Where are you? You're wandering around without taking care of the house.
Take care of your father instead.
Exploded in anger at my husband's words and coldly said, I'm done being your wife. Take care of your own parents if you're so concerned.
But who do you think you are? Speaking to me like that as my wife.
I just told you I'm leaving you. And by the way, both my father-in-law and I know about your affair. We've hired a lawyer, so we'll settle everything through legal channels, I said firmly. He could sense the fear in my husband's voice as he trembled on the other end of the line. He was shouting something loudly, and it was so incomprehensible that I couldn't understand anything. Anyway, in the end, he said something cocky like, my mom is on my side. There's no way I'll lose to someone like you. It's true that my mother-in-law used to work in a law firm doing administrative work, but the lawyer at that law firm is a friend of my father-in-law. Well, it's true that my mother-in-law has some knowledge from working at a law firm. She only works in administration, so she doesn't have the expertise to compete with a professional lawyer. So there's no point in trying to reason with her. I left all the negotiations to my father-in-law's friend, and the outcome was a complete victory. But in the first place, the evidence had already been collected by the lawyer friend of my father-in-law, who also knew all the details. Even in the presence of my father-in-law's friend, who was a client of both my mother-in-law and my husband, they had no qualms about verbally abusing me. Actually, I didn't know at the time, but it seemed that the conversation had been recorded, so there was no shortage of evidence. My mother-in-law was completely dumbfounded, as she never expected to have to fight against her boss, and had always planned to rely on him if anything happened. As the result of knowing that the friend of my father-in-law was also aware of my mother-in-law being very abusive towards my father-in-law, even in the presence of the friend who was their guest. Both my husband and mother-in-law were ultimately faced with the prospect of divorce. My mother-in-law, who had no income and was a homemaker, was left with nothing after the divorce, and she was kicked out of the house without any property division. I received proper compensation from my husband's settlement. Ironically, it's a silver lining in the misfortune that the absence of children made the negotiation smoother. We argued over the amount of compensation a bit, but apparently my father-in-law's friend gave him a strong scolding, and he didn't want it to turn into a full-blown lawsuit, so he eventually paid up. My father-in-law went to the facility as planned, selling the house as he intended. I went back to my parents' house. Up until then, my husband and mother-in-law had been so selfish and never tried to do anything themselves. The two who had lost their home ended up moving into a small run-down apartment, but the inside of the house became a famous junkyard in the neighborhood and was left in a state of disarray. It's been talked about at the workplace that there are rumors of affairs and divorces, so they are being mentioned. They seem to have pushed household chores onto each other, resulting in a situation where even cleaning couldn't be managed. However, living in such an unsanitary place is bound to affect their health, especially since my mother-in-law is of advanced age. As expected, my mother-in-law's health deteriorated in the unsanitary living conditions, and my husband became overwhelmed with housework, caregiving, and work, causing him to suffer from mental illness. On the other hand, I visit the facility where my father-in-law is once a week to see him. It seems that since leaving the house, my father-in-law has a very peaceful look on his face and says, "I may have lost my son and wife, but I'm happy to have such a wonderful daughter." I thought that I would cherish this relationship and help in various ways so that the remaining years of my other father's life could be peaceful.